I spent 10 years preparing for tonight, but it only took 10 minutes to realize my family was never planning to show up. Standing alone in my restaurant at 11 p.m., surrounded by empty chairs and untouched place settings, I finally understood what invisibility felt like. The candles I'd spent hours arranging were burning low, casting shadows across tables set for people who would never arrive. The clock on the wall ticked louder with each passing second, marking time in a space that should have been filled with laughter, with family, with the people I loved most. Instead, there was just me, the silence, and the slowly dying hope that maybe, just maybe, they were running late. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I need you to know you're not alone in this. My name is Sophie Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and tonight was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. 3 months ago, I'd signed the lease on this small Victorian house in Southeast Portland, a space I'd walked past every day for 5 years, dreaming of what it could become. The building had good bones, exposed brick walls that told stories, and huge windows that let in the kind of natural light that made everything feel warmer. This wasn't just going to be a restaurant. This was going to be proof that I was more than the daughter who never quite measured up, more than the sister living in her brother's shadow. The day I found this place, I called home immediately, my hands shaking with excitement. "Dad," I said when he answered, "I found it. The perfect location. I'm really doing this." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence that feels heavy. "We'll talk about this later, Sophie," he said, his voice carrying that tone I knew too well, the one that meant he didn't approve but wouldn't say it directly. I sent the invitations a week before the grand opening, handwriting each one on cream-colored cardstock. The one for my parents took me an hour to write, crossing out words and starting over until I got it right. "This is the dream I've held since I was a little girl," I wrote in careful script. "I can't imagine this day without you here beside me." My brother Ezra called 2 days later, and I heard the conflict in his voice immediately. "Sophie, I need to tell you something," he started, but then I heard my father's voice in the background, sharp and commanding. "Ezra, come here." The call ended abruptly. I convinced myself he was planning a surprise, maybe organizing everyone to arrive early and help set up. The afternoon of the opening, I was a mess of nerves and excitement. The restaurant looked perfect, exactly as I'd envisioned it. Fresh flowers on every table, the scent of my signature dishes wafting from the kitchen, soft jazz playing in the background. At 3 p.m., Ezra sent a text. "Can you call me?" But I was elbow deep in prep work. "Just tell me now," I texted back. "What time are you getting here?" The response came after a long pause. "Sophie, and then nothing. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. I had a restaurant to open, guests to impress, a dream to prove was worth believing in. 6 p.m. arrived with the first guests, friends from the industry and former co-workers. My sous chef Ben had arrived hours early, as always, solid and reliable in a way my own family had never been. 7 p.m. came and went with no sign of my parents, my brother, anyone with my last name. I kept glancing at the door between greeting guests, my smile growing more forced with each passing minute. By 8 p.m., I was checking my phone obsessively, calling numbers that went straight to voicemail, sending texts that showed as unread. Around 9 p.m., as the evening crowd began to thin, one of my guests mentioned something casually, not knowing how those words would shatter me. "Oh, I heard there was a big party at the Heathman Hotel tonight," she said, sipping her wine. "Something about a promotion party for a lawyer named Ezra Hayes." Any relation? Time stopped. The sounds of the restaurant faded to white noise, and I felt my hands go numb. The Heathman Hotel was 15 minutes away. My brother's promotion party. Tonight. The same night as my grand opening, and not one person in my family had mentioned it, had warned me, had given me the chance to reschedule. They'd all chosen his success over mine without even telling me there was a choice to make. I excused myself to the kitchen and stood there gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Ben found me there 5 minutes later, tears streaming down my face that I couldn't seem to stop. "They knew," I whispered. "They all knew, and no one said anything." He didn't try to tell me it would be okay. He just stood there, solid and present, while I fell apart in a way I'd never allowed myself to before. By 11 p.m., the last guests had left with kind words and promises to return. Ben and I cleaned in silence, his presence the only thing keeping me grounded. I mechanically stacked the pristine plates that no one from my family had eaten from, folded the napkins that hadn't been used, blew out candles that had burned for people who never came. In the warming drawer, I found the special dish I'd prepared just for my mother, braised short ribs with red wine reduction. The meal she'd once told me was her favorite when I was 12 years old and dreaming of being a chef. Now it sat there, cold and untouched, a monument to hope that had died slowly over 5 hours. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my father. "We need to discuss the restaurant. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the house." No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he'd just missed the most important night of my life. I stared at those words, reading them over and over, waiting to feel the anger or hurt I thought should come. Instead, I felt something different, something I'd never experienced before when it came to my family. It was a strange emptiness, a void where all my expectations and hopes had once lived. I set the phone down on the counter, and for the first time in my life, a voice in my head whispered something revolutionary. "This is enough. You don't have to keep doing this." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my small apartment staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment I'd ever felt invisible in my own family. My graduation from the Culinary Institute of America, where only my mother showed up because my father had to attend Ezra's mock trial competition. The full scholarship I'd won to study in France, announced at dinner and immediately overshadowed by Ezra's acceptance to Harvard Law. My 30th birthday, which fell on the same day Ezra made junior partner, a detail that meant my birthday dinner became his celebration, while I sat at the end of the table, smiling and pretending I didn't mind. I'd spent 32 years making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, believing that if I just achieved enough, did enough, proved enough, they would finally see me. But lying there in the dark, I finally asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. Why did I keep thinking this time would be different? I woke at 6 a.m. after maybe 2 hours of actual sleep. Getting ready, I made choices I'd never made before when preparing to see my family. I chose simple jeans and a plain sweater instead of the dress I usually wore to impress my father. I didn't put on the careful makeup I typically applied to look more professional, more put together, more worthy of their approval. For the first time in years, I didn't pack a gift, didn't bring homemade pastries or expensive wine as an offering. Ben called as I was leaving, his voice rough with concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, and the scary thing was, I meant it. There was a calmness in me that felt almost dangerous, like I'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't find my way back. The drive to my parents' house took me through familiar streets. Their home sat in West Hills, a colonial-style mansion in Portland's wealthiest neighborhood, all perfectly manicured lawns and fresh paint. I'd always felt a mix of pride and inadequacy pulling into this driveway. Today, looking at the house, I felt something different. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also cold, a monument to appearances rather than warmth. I used my key to let myself in. The smell of coffee hit me as soon as I entered, along with the low murmur of voices from the dining room. When I walked in, the conversation stopped abruptly. My father sat at the head of the table with his newspaper. My mother stood by the sink with her hands wrapped around a mug, and Ezra sat to my father's right, looking like he hadn't slept either. "Sit down, Sophie," my father said, his voice carrying that controlled tone he used in courtrooms. I sat in my usual seat at the opposite end of the table, the position I'd occupied for 32 years, always at the far end, always the furthest from the center of attention. "We need to talk about your decision," my father began, not with an apology or an acknowledgement of the previous night, but with a statement that positioned my dream as a problem to be solved. "I know you're disappointed that we couldn't make it last night, but I think this was an opportunity for you to reconsider." I sat there, hands folded in my lap, and for once I didn't rush to fill the silence with explanations or apologies. "Ezra received an offer to make partner," my father continued. "This is a pivotal moment in his career." "We couldn't possibly." I cut him off, and even the act of interrupting him felt revolutionary. "Couldn't possibly spare 2 hours?" The silence that followed was deafening. What came next, I wasn't prepared for. My father told me about his younger brother, Thomas Hayes, a man whose name had been forbidden in our house for as long as I could remember. Thomas had opened a fine dining restaurant in Seattle 25 years ago, had poured everything into it, had been successful at first, but within 3 years the restaurant had failed spectacularly. Thomas lost his savings, his house, his marriage fell apart. "I had to lend him money to pay his debts," my father said, his voice flat. 2 years later, Thomas killed himself in the apartment I was paying for. The words hung in the air like smoke. This was the family secret, the reason behind every dismissive comment about my career choice. "I can't watch you go down that same path, Sophie," my father said. "I'm trying to protect you." But even as he said it, his voice remained cold, clinical, like he was presenting a case rather than expressing concern for his daughter. Ezra suddenly spoke up, his voice tight with emotion. "Dad, Sophie isn't like Uncle Thomas. She's prepared, she's talented." But my father cut him off. "You don't understand the restaurant industry, Ezra." Ezra looked at me with an apology written all over his face. "Sophie," Ezra said softly, "I tried to convince Dad to postpone my party. I begged him, but he said this was a lesson you needed to learn." The words hit like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident or a scheduling conflict. This was intentional, a punishment disguised as protection, a test I was meant to fail. Then my mother did something I'd never witnessed in my entire life. She stood up, her coffee cup clattering to the counter, her whole body shaking. "Richard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you even hear what you're doing?" My father looked at her with warning in his eyes. "Margaret, this doesn't concern you." But she continued, tears streaming down her face. "You're doing to Sophie exactly what you did to me 30 years ago." The room went silent. "I was an artist," she said, turning to me. "I was accepted into an artist residency program in Paris, a year-long program that could have launched my career. But your father said Paris wasn't appropriate for an engaged woman. He said I had to choose my art career or our family." Her voice broke. "I chose family, and I've regretted it every single day since." I stared at my mother, this woman I'd lived with for 32 years, and realized I'd never really known her at all. She looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen. "Sophie, I tried to take my own life when Ezra was 3 years old. Did you know that?" The world tilted. "I couldn't bear the weight of all I'd given up," she continued. "Your father found me and got me to the hospital in time. After that, He became obsessed with controlling everything, convinced that if he managed every aspect of our lives, nothing bad would happen again. She turned to my father. "But you didn't save me, Richard. You just made sure I stayed alive while killing everything I loved about myself." I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady. I looked at my father, this man who'd shaped my entire life, and felt something shift inside me. "I think we're done here," I said calmly. My father's head snapped up. "Sophie, sit down. We need to resolve this." But I shook my head. "No, Dad, we really don't." My mother's voice stopped me at the door. "Sophie, wait. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I let him do to you what he did to me." I went to her and held her hands. "It's not too late, Mom," I whispered, "for either of us." As I walked out of that house, leaving my father standing in stunned silence, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not anger, not triumph, but a profound sense of relief. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn a place in their approval. Now, finally, I was choosing to give myself permission instead. I drove without destination, tears streaming down my face so hard I had to pull over. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and my chest felt tight like I couldn't get enough air. But underneath the pain was something else, something I couldn't quite name. I ended up at Waterfront Park, sitting on a bench overlooking the Willamette River, watching the water flow past while my mind raced. For the first time in my life, I'd said no to my father. I'd walked out. I'd chosen myself. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I thought about my mother's confession, about Paris, about a young woman with dreams who'd been told to choose between love and ambition. And I thought about myself, standing alone in my restaurant last night, finally understanding that their approval was never coming. My phone buzzed with texts from my father, each one more insistent than the last. "You need to think seriously about this. I won't accept this disrespect. Call me immediately." I read them all and felt nothing. For 32 years, those words would have sent me into a panic. Now they felt like noise from a world I was stepping out of. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence. A question formed in my mind, clear and urgent. Who was I without their approval? Who would I become if I stopped trying to earn love that came with so many conditions? When I finally drove back to the restaurant around 2 p.m., I was surprised to find someone waiting by the door. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and a warm smile that reached her eyes. "I came by last night," she said as I approached, "but it seems I missed the actual opening." I apologized, fumbling with my keys. "I'm Clara Morrison, a retired food critic. I used to write for the Portland Tribune." She looked at the restaurant with genuine interest. "I'd love to see what you've created here if you're willing to share." Something about her presence felt safe, and before I knew it, I was inviting her inside. "I don't know if I can cook right now," I admitted, my voice cracking. Clara smiled. "Then cook something for yourself, dear." The best food always comes from honesty. I found myself in the kitchen, Clara sitting at the counter watching as I worked. I decided on something simple, something comforting. A mushroom risotto with truffle oil, the kind of dish that required attention and patience. As I cooked, Clara asked questions, not pushy or intrusive, just genuinely curious. "Why did you want to open a restaurant?" And for the first time, I told the whole truth. About growing up invisible, about parents who never saw my achievements, about a grand opening where no one from my family came because they were all at my brother's party instead. I told her about my mother's confession this morning, about Paris and art and dreams deferred. Clara listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving my face. When I placed the risotto in front of her, my hands were shaking. She took a bite, and the silence stretched so long I thought I'd somehow messed it up. Then she set down her fork and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "This is the best risotto I've had in 10 years, she said quietly. "Your food has something most trained chefs spend their whole lives trying to achieve. It has soul. It tells a story. It's honest." She reached across the counter and took my hand. "Let me tell you something about myself. My father wanted me to be a doctor. My mother wanted me to marry young. When I told them I wanted to write about food, they cut me off financially and emotionally for almost 30 years. I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "Do you regret it?" Clara smiled. "Not for a single day, because I lived my own life, Sophie. I didn't live someone else's idea of what my life should be." Before she left, she handed me her card. "I have a friend who's an editor at Portland Food and Wine magazine. They're always looking for new restaurants to feature. If you're interested, I could make an introduction." I looked at the card, then at Clara. "Why would you do this for me?" She smiled. "Because someone did it for me once, and I've been paying it forward ever since." After Clara left, I sat alone in my restaurant, really looking at it for the first time since last night's disaster. The empty chairs weren't a sign of failure. They were just waiting for the right people. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, typing, "I am Sophie Hayes. I am 32 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to live according to my own terms." That evening, Ezra showed up at my restaurant. "I need you to know something," he said without preamble, his eyes red like he'd been crying. "I never wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a writer. I have a completed novel sitting in a drawer at home, but I've been too afraid to pursue it because Dad would never approve." He looked at me with desperation in his face. "Watching you walk out of that house yesterday, I realized I've been living Dad's dream, not mine. I'm 35 years old, and I've never made a single decision based on what I actually want." We sat together in my empty restaurant and talked honestly for the first time in our lives. "What are we going to do?" Ezra asked. I thought about Clara's words, about my mother in her dusty studio, about all the dreams that had been deferred. "We're going to live," I said finally. "You're going to publish your book. Mom's going to paint. I'm going to run this restaurant. And if Dad can't accept that, then he'll have to choose between control and having a family." Later that night, my phone lit up with an email from Clara. The subject line read, "An opportunity you can't miss." Inside, she explained that her friend at Portland Food and Wine magazine was looking for emerging restaurants to feature. "If you're interested," Clara wrote, "the interview would be next week. This could change everything for you." I stared at the email for a long time. This was the kind of exposure that could make or break a restaurant, but it was also a point of no return. Once this story came out, there would be no hiding, no backing down, no making myself small again. I thought about my mother, about Ezra, about all of us trapped in our golden cages. Then I hit reply and typed, "Yes, I'm ready." I had 1 week to prepare for the interview. Ben and I spent the next 72 hours refining every detail. The menu was streamlined to showcase my strongest dishes, each one telling a story. The braised short ribs represented my mother's unfulfilled dreams. The mushroom risotto was about finding comfort in honesty. A deconstructed apple pie spoke to taking traditional expectations and making them your own. Every plate was a statement, a piece of my journey made edible. My mother started coming to the restaurant every afternoon, setting up an easel in the corner and painting while Ben and I worked. At first, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the brush. But slowly, day by day, something in her awakened. She painted abstract pieces, swirls of color that seemed to pour directly from some deep well of emotion. Then she moved to more representational work. A woman standing in a doorway looking toward light, a bird breaking free from a cage. The paintings were raw and powerful. "These are all the things I couldn't say for 30 years, she told me. I hung them on the restaurant walls, each one a testament to dreams deferred but not destroyed. Then my father showed up unannounced one evening, walking into the restaurant like he owned it. He stopped short when he saw my mother at her easel, paint on her hands, completely absorbed in her work. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" His voice carried that controlled anger I knew so well. "Mom's helping me," I said, stepping between them. My father turned his attention to me. "Sophie, this needs to stop. You need to close this restaurant, and Margaret, you need to come home." For a moment, the old fear rose up in me, but then I looked at my mother's paintings, at the life coming back into her eyes, and I found my voice. "No, Dad. What needs to stop is you controlling everyone's lives out of fear." The words hung in the air like a bomb. My father's face went red. "I am trying to protect this family from repeating past mistakes. Thomas destroyed himself with a restaurant. I will not let you do the same." I took a deep breath. "I'm not Uncle Thomas. I've trained for 10 years. I have experience. I have a business plan. But even if I fail, it will be my failure to learn from, not yours to prevent." My mother stood up, her voice shaking but clear. "Richard, our daughter is right. You've been so afraid of losing someone that you've been slowly losing all of us anyway." My father looked at her with betrayal in his eyes. "I saved your life, Margaret." My mother's face softened with sadness. "You saved my life, yes, but you've spent 30 years making sure I never truly lived. There's a difference." The door opened again, and Ezra walked in. "I'm resigning from the firm, Dad. I'm going to be a writer." The color drained from my father's face. Ezra's voice was steady, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I've spent 15 years living your dream instead of mine, and life's too short to be miserable just to please someone else." My father looked around at all of us, his family, standing together in opposition for the first time. "You've all lost your minds," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've given you everything. And this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away?" I said quietly, "You gave us everything except permission to be ourselves. You gave us love with conditions, approval with requirements, and we're all exhausted from trying to be who you need us to be instead of who we actually are." My father stood there, a powerful man who'd controlled every aspect of his family's life for decades, and for the first time, he had no argument. "If you continue down this path," he said finally, his voice cold, "don't expect my support. When this fails, don't come crying to me for help." He looked at my mother. "Are you coming home?" She shook her head, tears streaming. "Not tonight. I need to figure out who I am without you telling me." He left without another word. The interview happened 3 days later. Emma Rodriguez from Portland Food and Wine magazine arrived with a photographer. "Tell me about this place," she said. "What inspired you to open it?" I could have given her the safe answer, the professional response about culinary vision. Instead, I told her the truth. I told her about my family, about the grand opening where no one came, about learning that sometimes you have to choose between being loved and being yourself. I told her about my mother's paintings, about breaking free from expectations that were crushing us all. Emma listened with tears in her eyes. "This isn't just a restaurant story," she said softly. "This is a story about finding your voice." She tried the food, and every bite made her eyes light up. "This is more than technically excellent," she said. "Every bite tells a story. Would you be comfortable with me including your family's story in the article? I think people need to hear this." I hesitated, knowing that once this story was public, there would be no going back. But then I thought about all the years of silence. "Yes," I said, "tell the whole story." The article came out 1 week later with a title that made my heart stop. "From Silence to Voice: How One Chef Found Herself by Losing Her Family." It was beautiful and heartbreaking and honest. Within 2 hours of publication, my phone started ringing nonstop. Reservations poured in faster than Ben and I could handle. People commented online sharing their own stories of family pressure, of choosing between approval and authenticity. "Sophie," Ben said, his voice awed, "we're booked solid for the next 2 months." I looked at my phone, at the flood of support from strangers who understood. But there was nothing from my father. Not a call, not a text, not a single acknowledgement. I didn't hear from my father for 3 weeks after the article came out. My mother moved into my small apartment, and we became roommates, giggling late at night while she painted, and I developed new menu items. Ezra signed with his publisher and started editing his novel, his face lighter than I'd seen it in years. The restaurant thrived in ways I'd never imagined. Every table full, every review glowing. But underneath the success was a grief I couldn't shake, a daughter's grief for a relationship that maybe never really existed. Then, late one night as I was closing up, a man walked in. "I'm David Morrison," he said, "Clara's husband. And I'm also the Hayes family attorney. I have a message from your father. He wants to meet with you. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., just the two of you." I barely slept that night. My mother called early. "Whatever happens, sweetheart, remember that you've already won. You've already chosen yourself. He can't take that away." Those words steadied me as I drove to the address. Not my father's office, not the family home, but a small coffee shop near the park. My father was already there, looking older somehow, tired in a way I'd never seen. "Sit down, Sophie," he said, but his voice lacked its usual command. I sat and he ordered me a latte with an extra shot of espresso, exactly how I liked it. "You know my coffee order?" I asked, surprised. "I'm your father," he said quietly. "Of course I know." He set a worn leather journal on the table between us. "This belonged to Thomas," he said. "I've kept it for 25 years. I want you to read it." I opened the journal with shaking hands, seeing my uncle's handwriting for the first time. The entries chronicled his dream of opening a restaurant, the excitement of the early days, the slow creep of failure. But what struck me most were the entries near the end. Richard has always been the successful one. I thought if I could make the restaurant work, I could finally be worthy of the family name. But I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I wasn't cooking because I loved it. I was cooking to prove something. The final entry, dated 2 days before his death, read, "I don't regret the restaurant failing. I regret that I never had the courage to live for myself instead of for everyone else's opinion of me." I looked up at my father with tears in my eyes. "Why are you showing me this now?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I've read this journal every night for 25 years. I thought I was learning that dreams are dangerous, but I've been learning the wrong lesson all along." He took a shaky breath. "Thomas didn't die because he failed at his restaurant. He died because he never learned to define success for himself." He looked at me, really looked at me. "And I've been doing the same thing to you and your brother. Not out of cruelty, but out of terror that I'd lose you the way I lost him." "The article," he continued, his voice rough, "reading about how you felt invisible, it was like reading Thomas's journal all over again. And I realized I'd become the thing I was trying to protect you from." He pulled out his phone and showed me photos he'd taken of my restaurant from outside. I've been there every week since you opened, standing across the street, watching. I've read every review. I even came in once anonymously and tried your food. I stared at him in shock. You were there? He nodded. Every dish was perfect, Sophie. You have a gift I never allowed myself to see because I was too busy being afraid. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me, my father said. I'm here to tell you that I was wrong. About the restaurant, about your mother's art, about Ezra's writing. I was wrong to think protecting you from failure was more important than supporting your dreams. Tears were running down his face. I'm here to tell you that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of your courage, your talent, your strength. I'm proud that you were brave enough to disappoint me in order to honor yourself. We sat there in that coffee shop, and for the first time, we were really seeing each other. I love you, Sophie, he said, not because of what you achieve. I love you because you're my daughter, and I'm sorry it took me losing you to figure out how to say that. I wanted to be angry. Part of me felt like I should hold on to the hurt, but looking at him, I saw a scared man who'd let fear turn into control, who'd hurt the people he loved while trying to protect them. I'm not going to say it's okay, I told him, because it's not. What you did caused real damage. He nodded, accepting this. But I also understand that hurt people hurt people. And maybe, if we're all brave enough, we can learn to do better. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'd like you to come to the restaurant. Not to criticize, but just to be there as my dad. Can you do that? He squeezed my hand, tears still falling. I would be honored. 6 months later, I stood in my restaurant during the dinner rush, watching tables full of people enjoying food made with honesty and love. The space had become exactly what I'd envisioned, a place where people came not just to eat, but to experience something real. My mother's paintings covered the walls, and she had a gallery showing scheduled for next month. She and my father were still together, still working through decades of damage, but there was a softness between them now. It's not perfect, she told me last week, but it's honest. And honest is better than perfect. Ezra's novel had been released to critical acclaim, making several best-of-year lists. He'd left the law firm and was writing full-time. I'm making less money, he told me, grinning, but I'm actually happy. I didn't know the difference until now. My father came to the restaurant every Thursday night, always at 7 p.m., always sitting at the same table. He'd learned to be present without controlling, to appreciate without critiquing, to love without conditions. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly with the understanding that trust takes time to repair. I was so focused on protecting you from failure, he told me one night, that I never gave you the chance to show me you were capable of success. That was my failure, not yours. Clara had become a mentor and friend, stopping by regularly. The restaurant business is hard, she told me. You'll have bad days. But if you stay true to your voice, you'll be fine. She was right. There were challenges, but I faced each one as myself, making decisions based on my values rather than others' expectations. Ben had become my business partner officially, his steady presence essential to everything we'd built. A year ago, you wouldn't have believed this was possible, he said one busy Saturday night. You were so convinced you needed their approval to succeed. He was right. I'd spent so long believing my worth was tied to my family's validation that I couldn't see my own value. But standing in my thriving restaurant, I finally understood. I'd always been enough. I just needed to believe it myself. The restaurant had been written up in several national publications, and we'd been approached about expansion. But I wasn't interested in empire building. This space was enough. It was exactly what I'd dreamed of. a place where people felt seen and nourished, where food connected them to something deeper. My relationship with my family continued to evolve. We'd started having Sunday dinners together, rotating locations. The meals were sometimes awkward, old patterns trying to reassert themselves. But there was laughter too, real conversation, genuine interest in each other's lives beyond achievements. My father asked about my challenges without trying to solve them. My mother shared her art without apologizing. Ezra read passages from his work without disclaimers. We were learning to be a different kind of family, one built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy and control. I thought often about that terrible opening night standing alone in the empty restaurant. At the time, it felt like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But looking back, I saw it differently. That night broke something open in me, shattered the illusion that I could earn unconditional love through achievement. It forced me to choose between dimming my light or shining as brightly as I was capable of. I'd chosen to shine, and in that choosing, I'd given permission to the people I loved to shine too. My mother was painting, my brother was writing. Even my father was learning to live with less control. We were all finding our way to authenticity, messy and imperfect, but real. On the 1-year anniversary of my original opening night, I hosted a special dinner. My family was there, along with Clara, Emma from the magazine, regular customers who'd become friends, and Ben's family. We filled every table. Before service began, I stood in the middle of the restaurant and looked around at all these people who'd shown up. My father raised his glass. "To Sophie," he said, "and to the courage to disappoint the people you love in service of becoming who you're meant to be." We all drank to that, and I felt tears on my cheeks, the good kind, the kind that come from being seen and celebrated for exactly who you are. As the evening wound down and the last guests left, I stood alone in my restaurant for a moment, just as I had a year ago. But this time, the solitude felt different. It wasn't loneliness or rejection. It was peace, the satisfaction of a dream realized. The chairs weren't empty because no one cared. They were empty because the night was over, and tomorrow they'd fill again with people who chose to be here. I'd learned the most important lesson. I didn't need anyone's permission to live my life. I didn't need approval to pursue my dreams. I didn't need validation to know my worth. I just needed the courage to honor myself. And that courage had set me free. My phone buzzed with texts. From my mother, "Thank you for showing me it's never too late." From Ezra, "Proud to be your brother." And from my father, "I see you now, Sophie. I'm sorry it took so long. I love you." I held the phone, reading those words, feeling the weight of them. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined. I'd thought success would look like my family proud from the start. Instead, success looked like all of us learning to be brave enough to choose ourselves, learning that real love doesn't require you to shrink. As I turned off the lights and locked the door, I smiled. Tomorrow I'd be here again, cooking from my heart, building something real, living out loud. And that was everything.